The second week of training camp for the New Orleans Saints is here. YP Carmichael could be the X factor for this year's team. And could this be the year that Payton Turner finally breaks out and shows why he was a former first round pick? All that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast, brought to you by Scott Fickner Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott Fickner handles it all. You can give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. That's right, a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. Now let's jump into it on this July 31st, last day of the month, before we get into August, which means we get into preseason games, which means we're closer to week 1 of the NFL season. I can't wait. Let's talk about our training camp week 2 hopes on this Monday morning. And the first thing that I want to talk about is pretty simple. My hopes for the second week of training camp is, do we get a little bit more separation or a little bit more clarity as to the cornerback battle between Alontae Taylor and Paulson Adebo, which has to be thrilling, has to be exciting. And I want to add this, regardless of who wins this cornerback battle, I think the Saints are in a good spot for two reasons. One, both players are going to see the field at some point this season. It's the nature of the game. You're not going to just play two outside cornerbacks. You're going to play teams that are going to want to air it out. Both guys are going to get playing time. There's no doubt about it. But the second thing, and the more important thing, is not every team has the luxury of saying, hey, we have two quality players right now in Alontae Taylor and Paulson Adebo who can go out there and compete. And the winner of that battle gets to go compete opposite of Marshawn Lattimore. It's a luxury in a league that doesn't have a lot of great cornerback tandems at the moment. The Saints are going to position themselves well to be one of those teams that does have a duo that can get it done on the outside. So that's the first thing that I'm looking at training camp is, do the Saints get a little bit more clarity? They get a little bit more separation in that battle, or is it one of those things that might come down to the final week? And if it's going to come down to the final week, that means we're not really going to get much clarity, much separation at this moment. We're not going to get on Wednesday or Thursday. So that's the first thing that I'm looking at. The second thing that I'm hoping for, and it sounds like a no-brainer, but I feel like I got to say it. I'm going to sit here with my fingers crossed, hoping the Saints don't suffer another injury on the offensive line, because we've already seen Trey Turner go down. And the really, really frustrating part about the whole situation with Trey is, you take a former LSU guy, you bring him in, he's excited to get to work. Feel really good finally about the depth of your offensive line, because even though Trey Turner is no longer an offensive guard that plays at a Pro Bowl level, he's still better, in my opinion, than a Calvin Throckmorton. And you know that he has over 100 plus starts under his belt. So if he needed to start at some point this season, you'd feel relatively comfortable with him getting the job done. Well, unfortunately, he suffers a torn quad, brutal injury to have at this stage in his career, brutal injury to have regardless of what stage he is in his career. And his season's over before it ever really started. And I think for New Orleans, if you're going to talk about the one, I don't want to say weak point, I said the one concern, because I don't think the offensive line is a weak point. I think the health of the offensive line is a concern. Trevor Penning has dealt with injuries. Pete has dealt with injuries. Ruiz dealt with injuries. And you're really kind of banking on Ramczyk and McCoy staying true to form. And I think they will, but that's two-fifths of your O-line, and the whole left side of your O-line you got to be concerned about. So the fact that Turner already went down, less depth for this Saints team, that concerns me a little bit. It concerns me. So I want to see if the offensive line can stay healthy. That'll be another hope as we go in. The third hope, and I don't think this is a big thing at all, because I think New Orleans, regardless of who ends up being the I don't want to say the top guy, but who ends up being the number one target, is irrelevant to me. But I want to continue to see strides taken by Michael Thomas and Chris Olave, because that first week was great for both players. You got Michael Thomas kind of reverting back to what he was, and you got Chris Olave, who's trying to take that year 2 jump and become a superstar. And I think both's capable, right? Like, I think if Michael Thomas is healthy, he's going to produce. The problem is, I don't know if he's going to stay healthy. As for Chris Olave, I think he has all the talent in the world and the potential to be a superstar this upcoming season. But does it happen? There's questions to it. So I want to see, as we continue to progress through training camp, are those two getting to where they need to be? Because if they are, that's going to change a lot for this Saints offense. Like, I think if you tell me that Olave and Michael Thomas are going to play up to their potential, first off, what an elite duo that would be. And they do so many different things that it really complements each other well, right? Like, Michael Thomas is going to dominate the middle of the field. Michael Thomas is going to dominate those short to intermediate routes. While Chris Olave can do well and succeed on those type of routes, you also know he's got the capability of being a burner and going down the field and making those big plays that really just breaks the opposing defense's will. And I think that those two, so far, so good. I want to hear a little bit more. I want to see a little bit more. And I think we will. That's one of those things I don't have a huge concern on about training camp. Those two are going to produce. Just got to hope they stay healthy during the regular season. And hopefully that's the case, because then that's where the Saints are going to take that next jump throughout the season. So that's the third thing. The last thing that I'm going to look at, not really too, I don't want to say too minor, this is actually very major, is the defensive line. What is the rotation? Does the rotation start to take form? I know that this is a weird year for New Orleans, right? Because it's Cam Jordan, and then everyone else is really either a new face or someone trying to cement themselves as a starter. Because new faces, you got Colin Saunders, you got Nathan Shepard, and you got Brian Brzee. And as for people trying to cement themselves, Carl Granderson, Payton Turner, like these are guys that are trying to take that next jump. So I want to see if they're able to do that. If they can, that'd be fantastic. But that's what I'm going to look at, because the defensive line rotation right now is not very well cemented. It's just not. So we'll see how that goes. And I think it's going to be worth watching for this second week of training camp. There's no doubt about it. So I mentioned him before, and we'll kind of go a little bit more in depth now, is Payton Turner. Payton Turner is already entering year 3, which is crazy to think about, because it feels like it was just yesterday when he was drafted and everyone's like, who the heck did the Saints just take? Because I remember that vividly. I mean, you could think about Adam and Ryan, who dominate Saints Twitter in so many ways, and rightfully so, because they're quite entertaining. Their reaction when Payton Turner got drafted was like, well, who the heck did we just take? And a lot of people felt that way. And unfortunately, a lot of the criticisms, the concerns, the questions, instead of being silenced, they've actually kind of been amplified, because Payton Turner's missed a lot of games. Hasn't really been healthy. When he is healthy, there's a flash, and then it just gets snuffed out because he gets hurt. And Payton Turner is not delusional. He is not ignorant to all this going on, because last week, this is what he had to say. It's no secret. It's a big year for me. Big for us, but especially for me and my situation. The past 2 years haven't been what I expected them to be, and what the front office expected me to be, just with all the injuries and stuff. So it's a big year for me. He addressed it. And it's one thing to address it. It's another thing to address it and then go out and play really well in training camp. And so far, Payton Turner has played well. And Payton Turner has earned reps with the first team defense, which is what you want. You don't want him handed the keys to the car. You want him to earn it. And he is earning it right now. And I am so thrilled for him. And I think for the Saints, if they're going to reach that ultimate goal, right, if they're going to get to where they want to be, Payton Turner's got to be a part of it. Because Cam Jordan, still a really good player, at this stage in his career, you cannot be relying on him to get you 15 sacks. That's just not fair. If he gets you 8, he gets you 9, great season. What are you getting across from? So I want to see how that happens. But I also think for Payton Turner, the time is now, because you are entering year 3. If you want to have your 5th-year option picked up next year, you got to play well in year 3. So when you go into year 4, there's no doubt in their mind that they want to pick up your option. And as of right now, his option will not get picked up because he doesn't play. But the talent is there. I think the skill set's there too. I don't think this is one of those raw prospect type of guys. I think he just doesn't stay healthy enough to get his footing under him. So could this be the year that Payton Turner breaks out? Absolutely could be, but he's got to stay on the field. Now, am I really, really happy with what I'm hearing about him? Absolutely. Do I think a little bit more highly of him than others? Yes, because I think the skill set is there. If I go back and watch that Rams game, he was playing well. I think he played well against the Raiders too. And you start to see what the Saints saw when they drafted him, and then a freak injury, and you're like, all right, well, there goes the season for him. And it's super frustrating. I feel for him. It's not a situation that you wish on anyone, but it also is part of the game, right? These injuries and these fluke injuries, and whether or not it is fair. So I think for Payton Turner, this could be the year he breaks out. I very well think the talent is there. Now we just got to hope it happens. But I would not be, I'll say it today on this July 31st, I would not be stunned at all if Payton Turner has a really good year. I wouldn't be stunned. I just think it makes so much sense right now. He's entering year 3. It's do or die time. And he's finally healthy. So we'll see what happens, but that's definitely something that I'll be looking at. The third and final thing for today's Monday show is probably the most important, the most pivotal. Pete Carmichael will be the Saints' X factor this season, for better or worse. Whether you like it or not, it's the truth. And I'll tell you why. So we all know coming into this season, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Dennis Allen, right? And it makes sense. Dennis Allen has not won a lot of games as a head coach. Dennis Allen hasn't proven that he's a head coach. So the pressure's going to be on. But the one thing I could say about Dennis Allen in full transparency is the guy knows how to coach defense, and the guy gets the best out of that side of the football. So I know that there will definitely be, at least from what the numbers are showing me, a decent Saints defense. How do I know? Since 2016, here are the numbers for the Saints in terms of opposing teams' points per game. 20.4, 22.1, 21.3, 21.1, and 19.7. So pretty much the Saints have been allowing under 22 points per game since 2016 with Dennis Allen as their defensive mind. So I expect that side of the ball to be rocking. I really do. The question is the offense good enough to play complementary football? Is the offense good enough to help out that side of the ball? And as of right now, I can't say for certain that I know that will happen, but what I will say is that the Saints have given Pete Carmichael every weapon, every tool that he needs to succeed. They bring him back for another year, despite the fact that the Saints as an offense were putrid. They averaged 21.4 points per game last year. 21.4. And there was a game where they struggled against the Panthers. There was a game they didn't score against the 49ers. There were moments where this offense looked so inept. But they bring him back. And not only do they bring him back, they improve their quarterback room, getting in Derek Carr. They add depth to the backfield with Kendre Miller and Jamal Williams. They give him a red zone weapon in Jimmy Graham. They bring in a do-it-all tight end who hopefully is on the rise in Foster Moreau. They bring back Michael Thomas. They add an A.T. Perry. They add a Brian Edwards. Offensive line doesn't change, but that might not be a bad thing. It's good to have continuity on the offensive line. There were no negative moves made by the Saints in terms of their thought process on offense. Every move they made, literally every move they made this offseason, offensively speaking, was to make things lighter for Pete Carmichael, make things easier for Pete Carmichael, make sure he has more weapons at his disposal. So he's got the array of weapons at his disposal. He's got a better quarterback now who fits schematically with his offense better than the previous one, in my opinion. And granted, this could change in an instant. You got your guys that are healthy at the moment. It's not like people are coming back from injuries right now. For the most part, everyone's ready to rock. So the weapons are there. The ingredients are there. Now he's got to go out there and cook. And I don't know if he will, because I do think, well, it's easy for people to bring up what Pete Carmichael did back then. And even when Sean Payton was suspended, the offense was rolling. They had prime Drew Brees, and prime Drew Brees was pretty much an added coach on the field. So I don't know if we should give too much credit. But what I will say is, and I'm going to be fair about this, I won't give as much blame for last year as I want to for one reason. This Saints offense did not have as many weapons last year as they do this year. They just didn't. There's a lot more weapons at their disposal this year. Now, look, did I love the idea of bringing him back? Not necessarily. I like going younger at offensive coordinator. I think this is a young man's game with some aspects. And I think there's so many coaches, especially from the young variety, that are bringing in new innovative ideas that really spark up the game and give us a little bit more of a fresh take on the offense. So I wouldn't have minded if the Saints went out and got another guy. But the Saints also knew a lot of teams were going out. And considering their situation at the time, they weren't as desirable. You know, think about it. The Chargers had an offensive coordinator opening. If you're an offensive coordinator, you want to go coach Justin Herbert or you want to go coach the Saints? And this was before the Saints got Derek Carr. This was before the Saints kept Michael Thomas. This was before they got Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller. So the Saints were in a less desirable spot, whether we like to hear it or not. Like, that's just a fact of the matter. So they bring him back, and now he's got a chance to redeem himself. And if he doesn't, just like Dennis Allen, he'll be out of a job, and the Saints are going to have to start over. But I do like the idea of, if it is your last stand, if it is your chance to redeem yourself, have everything you need. So when the season ends, if you don't get the job done, we know whose problem it is. We know who's to blame. No excuses. We know it will be their fault. And that's kind of how I feel about the Saints team right now, which is why I actually feel good. Because I like this roster. I think there's a nice mix of veterans with young talent. And now it's on the coaches. But make no mistake about it, if you're seeing what's going on early in training camp, whether it's Shaheed out of the backfield, whether it's Alvin working with the wide receivers, it seems like the Saints are going back to being a little bit more creative. And that creativity could be the difference between them winning and losing games, because the offense had no creativity last year. Absolutely none. So I'm excited to see how this goes down. And I think that Pete Carmichael will absolutely, without a doubt, be the X factor for this Saints team because I expect Dennis Allen's defense to play well, regardless of how we feel about Dennis Allen. I don't know if I can say I expect the offense to play well. I know the pieces are there, like I said, but he's got to make it happen. And the good thing about the Saints is that they gave him more than enough that now he's got everything he needs. Make it happen. So that's why I think Pete Carmichael will be the X factor for the Saints. And there's no doubt in my mind, if the Saints play complementary football, they're going to win 10-plus games. But are they going to play complementary football? And it's a huge question. But like I said, you have weapons in the passing game. You got weapons in the run game. Find something that works. Because not many teams can say they can throw to Michael Thomas and Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and Jawan Johnson and Alvin. And on the flip side, not a lot of teams can say they can run the football with Alvin, with Jamal Williams, with Kendre Miller, with Taysom Hill. So they're there. Pete Carmichael, Derek Carr, make it happen. Let's get the job done. So that's doing it for my Pete Carmichael rant. And without further ado, let's get into some type of comments that you guys have put on here. And good morning to everyone in the chat. Hope everyone's doing well on this Monday. I'll get into this first comment from Margaret. She said, worst decision they made is keeping Carmichael, in my opinion. No imagination in his offensive calls. Yeah, I think last year there was no creativity. Very bland offense, didn't take chances, ran the ball on 2nd and 10 way too many times for my liking. I never really liked the Saints offense at all last year. There was never a moment that I really was like, wow, this is a fun game. I never felt that way. So hopefully that changes this year, but it's very easy to feel the way you guys feel right now because I feel it too. Baddest Sports Show podcast in the Deep South says it's all about being healthy at the quarterback position. It certainly is. And again, that's why I also say I cut some slack for last year. Not all, just some slack because Saints immediately start the year with Jameis Winston hurt. Immediately. And this is what bothers me, right? So when the Saints were in on Derek Carr, a lot of people were like, well, is Derek Carr that much better than Andy Dalton? Let's watch Derek Carr this year, and then let's talk about that again. Because for people who thought that Derek Carr is not a big upgrade over Andy Dalton, you're out of your mind. Like, Andy Dalton should have not been starting 14 games last season. He's no longer capable of doing that, which we saw on full display. How many games did Andy Dalton miss a read that he should have made? How many times did the Saints get in the red zone and they did nothing? How many times did Andy Dalton lead drives that were just worthless? And I'm not trying to rip Andy Dalton completely because Andy Dalton did an admirable job for a guy that should not be starting 14 games at this stage in his career. But no one is expecting a top-tier offense with Andy Dalton as your quarterback. Look around the league. Look around the league. Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Trevor Lawrence, all these exciting young quarterbacks. And the Saints rolled into last year with Andy Dalton. So yes, Pete Carmichael was not good last year. And I think that because of that, this is a do or die year for him. But Lord, I mean, that's not a great situation to have. Not a great situation to have at all. Brian says, I saw possibly Shaheed out of the backfield. Yeah, so Shaheed was working out of the backfield. I love that concept because if you get Shaheed matched up with a safety or a linebacker, that's going to be the dream scenario for New Orleans. And I think for Shaheed, and I worry about whether or not they use him in the return game because I don't like the idea of using him in the return game because he is a really valuable wide receiver, and I hate to see him get banged up on special teams. I think that if you start to use Shaheed like this out of the backfield, get a little bit more versatility to his game, I think it's worth it. Like, I think he is that type of player who can make game-changing plays like that. So I'm excited to see what Shaheed does. And like I said, and like you mentioned, Brian, he was working out of the backfield, and now we hope we see it a little bit more this week, and that becomes a regular thing where you say, okay, the Saints are not going to be the same old Saints offense anymore. They're going to get a little bit more creative. They're going to focus on those mismatches. And that's why I get all aggravated about the way that Alvin's been used is for Alvin, he's got to be used as a receiver sometimes. And he doesn't always, but Lord knows he has to. So we'll see what happens there. Jerry says, still hurt we lost Trey Turner just days after we signed him due to a quad injury. Yeah, tough blow, man. Absolutely tough blow for Trey Turner. Bring back the LSU kid. Excited to get to work. Talked about being excited with camp, and boom, like your season just gets taken away from you like that. Can't help but feel for the guy. It really does stink. And it's a terrible injury to have. It's not one of those injuries that you feel like you can work back from quickly. I really believe Pete Carmichael is going to shock everyone healthy. Healthy Michael Thomas, healthy Alvin Kamara will be a big difference. Absolutely. Look, if those two are healthy, Saints are going to have a good offense. It's kind of that simple sometimes. Because the most fun I had watching the Saints offense last year was week 1. Guess who played well that game? Michael Thomas. So I do agree with you. And I think that's a big part of it, right? Like, if the Saints are going to be really good, obviously they got to be healthy. That's a no-brainer thing for me to say. But those two need to be who they can be, because I don't think it's a case of Michael Thomas being washed up or Alvin hitting the decline. I think just had one's been injured and the other had a bad year to his standards, which is a career year for some other running backs, because the Saints didn't have enough around him. Saints were using him like Derrick Henry sometimes. So that for me is a thing. When you let Alvin be more versatile and do 13 carries and 5 receptions, something like that, I think that's when he's his best. I really do. And I want to see that more. I want to see Alvin used in the passing game. You give him that option route, you give him the wheel route. Not many linebackers are keeping up with Alvin. Will they go out and get another offensive lineman? I bet they will. I bet they will. Can I say who? I'm not sure yet. But I would be stunned if they don't go out there, because they made it an initiative to go get Trey Turner. Like, they wanted Trey Turner in the building as that depth piece. Now you lose him. I'm not saying they don't feel good about their offensive line, but the Saints need to feel better about their depth. So I think they will go get another one. No doubt about it. And now you also hope, too, at that point, you hope Nick Saldiveri, the rookie that they got in the 4th round, you hope he starts to develop quickly, because he could be a big player for them in terms of depth, giving them that versatility if he's back on the field soon. How can you take chances with Andy Dalton as your quarterback? It is tough, right? It is very tough. Like, I think as an offensive coordinator, and again, I'm not excusing Pete Carmichael, but this league is predicated on quarterbacks making absurd throws, making off-script plays. You don't get any of that with Andy Dalton. Now, Andy Dalton's had a really respectable career. Former second-round pick out of TCU, made some Pro Bowls, made the playoffs multiple times. I'm not knocking Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton absolutely exceeded any career expectations people would have for him. But like I said, Andy Dalton in his 30s should not be playing that many games. Just shouldn't. I mean, the Panthers already came out, again, no brainer here, but came out and was like, all right, Bryce is starting. Yeah, like, obviously. Andy Dalton's there to be a mentor, not to be the starter, in my opinion. And that's kind of how last year should have went. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Do they need a better conditioning coach because the team has a lot of injuries? I mean, the Saints have fixed up the staff a little bit. Brought in a guy from Alabama who is well-renowned in that department in terms of kind of the health science of injuries. And the Saints are going to hope that makes a difference. And hopefully it does. But stuff like with Trey Turner going down, like, I don't know. Sometimes I think that's a fluke injury, especially early in training camp. Guys aren't at peak shape. Like, peak shape's going to be like week 1, they'll be in shape. They're going to be ready to roll. But the first week of training camp, there's some guys that got to work their way back into football shape. And unfortunately, when that happens, guys get hurt. And for Trey Turner's situation, a one-on-one drill, you never expect it to happen. It's just a fluke thing. But I think injuries haven't been a problem for the Saints. Don't get me wrong. Some of them are just wild, though. Wild. Like Marshawn Lattimore, lacerated kidney. James Winston, broken back on a sack. It's like, all right. I mean, like, the training staff should get blame when blame is warranted. But, like, sometimes it's just the football nature, the physical toll that it takes. It's hard to avoid these injuries. The biggest one is the return of Jimmy Graham. Look, Jimmy Graham, what a fascinating situation. I don't know how much he has left in the tank, but like he said, he's still 6'7", and he still likes the red zone. And I think the one flaw, and he's got more than one flaw, but the fatal flaw for Derek Carr is red zone efficiency. He is not great in the red zone. He's not great by the goal line. Maybe adding a 6'7" Jimmy Graham, who can get some jump balls from time to time, might fix that. And if that gets fixed, that's another thing off the checklist for the Saints. So I think Jimmy Graham's return, it won't be what we're accustomed to seeing, right? I mean, because we're used to seeing Jimmy Graham light it up. But I think that this team has some type of idea of how they want to use him. Bring him in 1 year, a little over $1 million. You got an idea. Now it's about executing that idea. But I think it's going to be around the goal line in the red zone. And look, I probably speak for a lot of people when I say this. I wouldn't mind seeing some touchdowns from Jimmy Graham this year, especially those fade routes, especially those jump balls. Like, I think he can still play that role. And I think for New Orleans, the red zone offense has to be better anyway. So why not? It'll look different, but I'm excited to see how that unfolds. Gregory says, do you think the team goes out and adds to the D-line for camp? I think we'll see. I think right now, from what I can say personally, They like what they've seen from Payton Turner. Carl Granderson has had some moments where he's flashed. And Isaiah Foskey actually, before the day off on Sunday, had a really nice practice on Saturday. So now I think for New Orleans, it's about hoping that carries over into the next week and then the week after that. Like, will I say no to D-line depth? Absolutely not. If the Saints feel like a move needs to be made, they should go out and do it. I think right now, though, the Saints kind of like what they got in terms of their pieces defensive line-wise and feel like they can go out there and figure out who wins that battle. And it might be Payton Turner. It might be Carl Granderson. And eventually it could be Isaiah Foskey who kind of works his way into things. But that's the way I look at it. Pad day, now we separate the contenders from the pretenders. Yeah, pad day is a big thing here. Pad day is absolutely where you start to feel that intensity. You will see way more in terms of high-level football today than you have last week. And you slowly start to ramp it up. So I'm excited for this. This is where guys like Michael Thomas get to shine. They absolutely do. Who do you think might be a surprising cut? Well, that's a good question. I really like that. Pull up Jerry's answer here because he's saying Traquan Smith could be a surprising cut. And that's not a bad pick, by the way. I think that's going to be a popular pick. I'm actually going to go with Will Lutz. I think Will Lutz is, at the moment, very much in a kicker competition with Blake Grupe from Notre Dame, the rookie. And I think that Will Lutz has kind of hit the decline of his career. I'm not saying that Will Lutz can't play anymore, but what I'll say, and this is kind of an alarming stat here, is Will Lutz's lowest made field goal percentage of a season. The lowest two are the last 2 years. 82.1 was in 2020. Obviously, we know he missed 2021. And then he comes out last year, makes 74.2% of his kicks. This is a guy that at the peak of his career, 93.3, 88.9, 86.1. So I'm not saying Will Lutz is definitely going to get cut. But if you're asking me to name a surprise cut, I'm going to say it's Will Lutz because he is very much in a kicker competition. And he is very much going up against a rookie kicker who's got a lot more juice in his legs at this moment. And he was the first to miss a training camp. Blake's been perfect still. Pressure's going to be on. And I think just from a money standpoint, Blake's a cheaper option than Will at kicker. So I'm going to go with Will Lutz right now. If I had to pick a surprise one, I'm sure as training camp progresses, there'll be other names. Like, this is a very good name to add here. Zach Baun is very much a guy that's going to be on the roster bubble. He's got to play well. He's got to edge out some other linebackers. Like, if Zach Baun's going to make this team, Zach Baun's got to make sure he edges out DeMarco Jackson. He edges out Ryan Connolly. He's got to edge out, Nick Anderson. He's got to edge out those guys. And we'll see if he does it. And if he does, great. He'll make an impact on special teams. But that's it. And this kind of goes to what Greg's asking here. Does Nick Anderson make the roster? I'll probably lean no at the moment, but he can change my mind in an instant. I just don't think he did enough the first week of training camp for me to be like, okay, I think he'll make the roster. But there's two things to say to that. A, we got 4 more weeks of training camp for this to roll around. And B, which is more important, preseason games. Preseason games is where these guys make the roster, in my honest opinion. Because training camp, while it's important, a lot of it, and especially the practices, are geared towards the offense to begin with. So it's tough for defensive guys to really make a huge impact and earn a spot on the roster when they're doing drills that are geared towards the offense. So those preseason games, those are the ones where guys like Nick Anderson got to make their killing, got to do what they do best, and then they can make it from there. But that's kind of where it starts. But we'll have a better idea once the preseason begins, and we are very close. I believe we're a week from next Sunday away from the preseason, if I'm not mistaken, which should be quite fun. Quite fun indeed, because Saints' first preseason game is going to be against the Chiefs. And they got the Chargers and Texans. So, yeah, Chiefs Sunday, August 13th. Should be a fun one. Should absolutely be a fun one. But anyway, guys, on this Monday, that is going to wrap it up for us here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. As always, I want to thank you guys for listening. I want to thank you guys for submitting some of your questions, concerns, predictions. Always appreciate it. I hope you guys have a fantastic week. Stay tuned for more content here at Boo Crew Media and also just Saints Twitter in general, or I guess Saints X now that it's no longer Twitter. Ridiculous. That's another topic for another day. We'll have content there, whether it's visual, some training camp notes, all that coming up. So make sure you subscribe to Boo Crew Media on YouTube and also follow them on the social media platforms. And as always, stay tuned for more content here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.